I have a love-hate relationship with dandelions. As a kid, lazy summer days were spent plucking them out of our backyard, blowing their seeds and watching the wind take them off into the neighbor's yard. There were a lot of dandelions in the neighbor's yard. But as a child, there was something so simple and wonderfully unique about a plant you could actually interact with. Fast forward 30 years or so, and I suddenly found myself as a suburban dad trying to maintain a decent lawn with decidedly mixed results in a world where dandelions were the enemy. A dreaded yellow weed popping up all over the place. Now, instead of bending down to pluck dandelions and blow seeds into the wind, I had a gardening tool specifically designed to dig the stubborn things out by their roots. Like I said, a love-hate relationship with dandelions. But I thought about this dynamic in relation to our gospel reading this morning, what's known as the parable of the wheat and weeds, or if you really want to go old school, the parable of the wheat and the tares. This is actually the second Sunday in a row, there's Susan, the second Sunday in a row where we hear Jesus tell a parable to a big crowd and then immediately explain it to his disciples. Last week it was the parable of the sower. And there are only 2 times in all of Scripture where Jesus does this, and we have them in back-to-back weeks. So it always feels a little presumptuous to preach on a text that Jesus himself has just explained. Nonetheless, here we are. But even with the explanation embedded in the passage itself, it's all rather confusing and even a little disturbing. In order to illuminate the concept of the kingdom of heaven, Jesus tells of a field where wheat and weed grow together. The workers naturally want to go out and pull out all the weeds, but the landowner says no, because the wheat and the weeds are so intertwined, to pull out the weeds would put the wheat itself at risk. So he tells them to wait for the harvest, after which time the wheat and the weeds can be separated. The wheat gathered into the barn, the weeds burned with fire. Now I know that whenever we get notes of judgment and talk of end times and burning things, it always gives us pause. But this is where the dandelion comes in. Because whether you see a dandelion as a flower or a weed depends largely on your perspective. As a child, I saw a flower filled with wonder. As an adult, I saw an ugly weed. Both of these things can be true at the same time. In the same way, as humans, we are complicated beings. Yes, we are made in the image of God, and yet we are all capable of doing terrible things. At times, it's impossible to distinguish what is wheat and what is weed in our own lives, let alone in the lives of those around us. But that's so often how passages like this have been used. They have been used to judge, to exclude, to condemn. And that surely is not of God. For our God is a loving a God who only sows good seed. Yes, evil exists in the world. Of that, there can be no doubt. We hear that it was the enemy who came in the middle of the night and sowed bad seed in the landowner's field. But it's important to remember that in these passages where such sorting takes place, whether it's wheat and weeds or sheep and goats, the main takeaway has to be that the act of judging others, is way above our pay grade. In no way, shape, or form is judgment part of the human job description. Judge not so that you may not be judged, Jesus tells us. And by the way, we humans are historically terrible at judging others. Think about slavery in this country and the religious justifications for it. Think about the treatment of the gay community in this country and the religious justifications for it. We don't have a great track record here. What one generation confidently and even theologically labeled as weeds, another generation came to recognize as wheat. And so rather than trying to separate wheat from weed, it's more fruitful and certainly more Christ-like to ask, are there weeds we're pointing to today that God may one day reveal as wheat? Because history suggests we're more often wrong than we'd care to admit. Why? Because we can't possibly know what is known only to God. And we may one day discover that in judging and condemning those we perceive as weeds, we have only opened ourselves to judgment and condemnation. So our role is not to judge or sort or condemn. Our role is to love and grow. To love our neighbors as ourselves, to welcome the stranger, to gather everyone in, and to grow as followers of Jesus, to strive day by day to become just a little bit more like Jesus in our interactions with others. So ours is to love and to grow and to leave the sorting to God. That's the posture that orients us towards the kingdom of heaven of which Jesus speaks. Yes, life is a mixed bag of wheat and weeds. We are a mixed bag of wheat and weeds. But the good news, the hope embedded in all of this, is that God only sows good seed. It is sown in us and through us and with us. That's what points towards the inbreaking of the kingdom of heaven right here on earth. It is sown in you, this good seed. It is sown in me and made magnificently manifest when we gather together to love and to grow in this place. You know, in the intervening years since I first joyfully picked a dandelion and later dug them out by their roots, the humble dandelion has actually undergone a renaissance, or at least a rebrand. No longer viewed as a vilified weed, the dandelion has been championed by horticultural groups as one of the first blooms to feed bees when it's too cold for other flowers, which positively impacts the entire ecosystem. You can also now find dandelion salads and dandelion gravy on menus in high-end bougie restaurants everywhere. And the roots can apparently even be roasted and brewed as an alternative to coffee, which sounds absolutely dreadful. But still, remember that you are the fruit of God's good seed. Continue to love God and one another. Strive to grow in your faith and remain open to the possibility that the weeds we encounter both in our lives and in our world may one day be revealed by God as wheat.